Afternoon. It's still June 21st. I know this morning I posted a piano video, and I'm surprised that I got motivated enough this afternoon, approximately 1:45, to actually record a world history video. Because although I've done a few in the past, say, 3 or 4 months, none of them, to my knowledge, got posted on Bluebird Semaphore. And that's not a good thing, because I was fairly committed to getting tidbits of history out, and under the assumption that folks would read them and get a little more insight into world history. Now, that being said, that's why I named it World History for Ordinary People. And I was up to somewhere number 50-something when I stopped doing this. I believe there was about 3 that I may have taped and never put up there. So today we're going to start World History for Ordinary People. This is going to be 1B. So I'm drawing a line in the sand, and we're starting with another grouping to try to keep some sort of record-keeping purposes. And although I said it early this morning, this is June 21, 2023. So World History for Ordinary People, 1B, is the start of the new grouping for World History for Ordinary People. And I have found, probably over the last 4 months, and I may have said this, I have started to look at these on the telly. That would be the television. On the telly, these YouTube videos, primarily documentaries, history, geography, and that sort of thing. Nature, warfare, and I had my doubts in the beginning, but those doubts have been cleared up. The documentaries that they put up, the films, they're worth watching. Even if it's just somebody doing a travel log, you're going to get to see the inside of countries that you never would see otherwise. You also get a little perspective on history. But let me say at the outset, none of it remotely can take the place of reading a book. Particularly a book written by a person of knowledge. Now, how do you define and how do you get to know that the book that is in your hand was written by a person of knowledge? Well, listen, that type of skill, to figure that out, doesn't come overnight. It comes with being a avid reader for the better part of a lifetime. So I feel very confident that when I'm reading a book, I'm getting the real deal from a knowledgeable individual. And I just can't tell you how important that is. It's very important. So since we talked last on world history, I know I had said I would be making effort to concentrate on Europe, and I got via books and and some of these documentaries on YouTube, information valuable to understanding European history. Now, of course, what's foremost in my mind is what I've read recently. And recently it's been World War I mostly. And a biography on Winston Churchill up until 1932 has shed a lot of light on European history. When a number of years ago, and I'm going to say probably more than 10 years ago, I got a hold of a book called The Last Parade, I believe. And it was a book, the thesis of the book was that World War I drew a line in the sand. Before that, you had a certain amount of civility, civilization, part of the human population would have the characteristics of civility and would carry with them the effects of civilization. And the book thesis is that World War I, it was like that up until World War I. After World War I, all of that civility, civilization, all went by the wayside. And so we can look at the more recent history, although it's not that recent anymore, say from, I want to say right from 1914, if not even a few years before that, right up to the present day. Civilization is not civilization. We live in, a big tank of chaos, and World War I had a good deal with making that happen. I mean, for one of the results of World War I, of course, is that the Bolsheviks took over Russia, and unfortunately, that was a big, big negative in world history. And from what I'm reading more recently, many powerful people in the European power structure stood by and let that happen. They let Lenin and Stalin let their dogs loose, and their dogs wound up killing Lenin. Responsibility 5 million during the warfare that they call a revolution. Was really a war between the Bolsheviks and the Russians. And Stalin had 15 million attributed to him. And like I said, revolutions don't usually have those kinds of numbers. Revolutions, like say the French Revolution, the American Revolution, you get thousands. They're in the thousands, 5,000s, 10,000s. Even the genocide in Africa now, although some of those numbers are quite atrocious. So we were really talking about war, and that war covered a large piece of geography. Not to call it a war is insane, but be that as it may, as you know, the Bolsheviks won, and the world kept on changing. Civilization kept on going down the tube. Civility kept on going down the tube. And we have what we have now, which is, just a freaking mess. That's what we have. We have a mess. But a lot of people are okay with a mess as long as it doesn't mess on them, But the long and short of it, it's going to mess on everybody sooner or later. But that's not primarily what I wanted to talk about. What I really wanted to talk about this fellow, Churchill, who, in my reading of history, and as you know, I always claim to have been paying attention and reading history all my adult life, and yet the only thing I would ever get about Churchill was, his heroics during World War II, and I would once in a while come across some reference to him in the in British imperialistic warfare down in South Africa. He made a bit of a name for himself there, and I only briefly, and possibly just due to a popular film, Gallipoli, somehow by paying attention to that, I was aware that Churchill was beat down because of that. At the time, he was the First Lord of the Admiralty, and that's a big deal in England. England lives and dies on its sea power, and he had all the power. He was the First Lord of the Admiralty. Well, anyway, he got kicked to the curb because they blamed the failure at Gallipoli on him. And the fact of the matter is that he was not the cause. What he required, the boys in the hometowns, in other words, the politicians in the war cabinets and the councils and all that, the parliaments, did not give Winston what he wanted. And so Gallipoli was lost, tragic though as that is. Now, the reason why at the time, we would have called them the talking heads, but they didn't have that sort of newscasting going on then. They just had their newspapers, and those guys running those newspapers had a lot of power. But anyway, they thought about it, and they said, you know what, that Dardanelles, which runs down the, let's call it the southeast coast of the peninsula Gallipoli, was the one side of a channel called the Dardanelles, the Straits, that would take you from the Adriatic, maybe the Aegean, I gotta get that square in my head, over to the Sea of Marmora, and from there you go through the Bosphorus, and you'll be in the Black Sea, which is what the Allies needed to do for their ally, the Russians, because the Russians were not getting the supplies they needed. They were basically a landlocked country. And, they had their Vladivostok and all that stuff, but they needed the Black Sea ports, and they couldn't get to them. So everybody said, yeah, this looks good, let's do Gallipoli. We'll go there, we'll blast our way through, and then we'll take Constantinople. We'll keep our naval forces posted in the Sea of Marmara, all over the Bosphorus, through the Dardanelles, in the Black Sea, and we'll be home free. Unfortunately, it didn't happen that way. The Turks, who were controlling either side of the Bosphorus at that time, put up a formidable fight, and a lot of mistakes were made, and these were military mistakes, not political. Churchill was on the political side of making decisions. But as the First Lord of the Admiralty, he gave the blessing to use the fleet. The fleet had great battleships. They were going to blow everything out of the water. Unfortunately, the Strait, the Dardanelles, got they got those mines that they put in the water, well planted, and they blew up a lot of ships, and it started to be a disaster. The two guys really responsible for the failure over there was both on the Army side of things. One was the great man, Kitchener, and the other was his sidekick, a guy named Ian Hamilton. Now, that guy, from what I read, I mean, he should have never been in charge of anything. Never. But, you know, that's the way things happen, and they seem to happen, particularly in the British Army. You just get these warm people kicked upstairs. And one example, I mean, during a really fierce battle taking place in Gallipoli, he was on the I guess it would have been the fleet admiral's ship at the time, doing R&R, what we would call recreation. You know, just terrible. And they both got their upcomings. Hamilton got kicked down. Somebody else took his place. And Kitchener, he was going up to, I believe, Petrograd to St. Petersburg, one time Leningrad, then back to St. Petersburg. He was going up there for some meeting, and the ship he was using to get there got mined, and he died. But Kitchener was the big guy for a very long time, and I think the reason he was there for a very long time because he had powerful friends all over the place. Plus, he seems to have been skilled at hiding, very skilled at hiding, so nobody could get him. Be that as it may, the Dardanelles went down the tubes. I think at a loss of 180,000 Allied troops, some gargantuan number. And of course, you think of all the prestige and the elan created for the Turkish troops, and the Turkish troops were not anything anybody gave any credence to, but along came a very fine military commander that headed up the troops over there. He did good strategy. He beat the pants off of the Allies, and then they were sitting on the top of the world. In the meantime, the Allies were disgraced because of Gallipoli, disgraced. And of course, one of the first people to be put to the curb was Churchill, First Lord of the Admiralty. Now, and then he goes into almost oblivion. But I believe he had been for quite some while a member of Parliament, even though he was First Lord of the Admiralty, and he was this and that, and the other cabinet posts, blah, blah, blah. He came to political power by taking a seat in the House of Commons, and if I'm correct, the same seat his father, Lord Randolph, was owner of, not owner, but you know, that was his seat in the lower house, the House of Commons. And Winston went up for election. I think he lost the first time he tried. The second time he tried, and that was it. He was in there forever, even when he was out of favor. And somebody seems to be coming to my house. What is this all about? Well, we'll see. So he got, you know, there's probably some guy selling storm doors or something. Anyway, he had that seat. So, but he's disgraced. All the papers are saying he's such a bad guy. He's a megalomaniac, so on and so forth. But and he's just downright distraught. I mean, he loved his Navy. He loved it, you know. And he was distraught. He was at a weak point. He was at a real weak point. So, anyway, that guy's walking away. Anyway, not too much time passed, and you know, he just was such a powerful figure in British social structure. He was a giant, and you know, people feared him, not because he was malicious, or anything, but just his intellect. He was the kind of guy walking around, that's it for everybody else, you know. Usually the only person that could possibly rein him in would have been a prime minister, but or the king, you know. But other than that, Winston ruled the roost. He had one fiery under Lord of the Sea, whatever. He had one fiery admiral under him. There's always Sea Lord. It would be the first Sea Lord, a guy named Jack Fisher. He would stand up to Churchill, but I would say not very effectively, because he would after being beat, after seemingly beating Churchill up, he would relent and come back to the fold. Another guy in all of that, those going-ons, and you've heard me talk about him before, was Admiral Beatty. I think it was David Beatty. And when I talked about him in the past, I did not give him any high marks. I felt that he was a person who, because of his connections, and because he was a decent enough naval strategist, you know, he got put in charge of important positions. And I think he was more or less, because of his the fleet he commanded, he was like the second guy on the sea. Because the first Lord of the Sea, first sea admiral was a guy named Jocelyn. And then under him was Beatty. Now Beatty wasn't, at the time of first anything, he just had command of the First Fleet, and that was a very prestigious to have that is very prestigious, and yet, you know, he never really had a big battle during that whole World War I. He would just go out of his way not to engage. And the same could be said about the first Sea Lord, that he also didn't do too much, you know, stretching himself so that he could engage the German Navy. The German Navy also was playing pussyfoot. They all didn't want to engage because they know if they engage, more than likely the British would win, more than likely the war would be over, more than likely Germany would have to go home. So nobody wanted to fight. There was too much on the table for any of them. And the big battle supposedly was the Battle of Jutland, which was hardly a battle at all. Anyway, I'm going off target here. The picture I'm trying to build is that Churchill eventually, when not too much time after his being kicked to the curb had expired, they said, okay, listen, what do you want? We'll give you something over in the army at the front. Because that's what Churchill wanted. If you're going to give me anything, send me to the front. So they made him a battalion commander. At the time, a battalion was 7,000 men. So his rank was major. And they sent him to France, to the front, to be the battalion commander. I don't know for sure, something like the 207 Battalion. So he does that. He does very well at it, very well. His men love him. I mean, first, they weren't thrilled because he had gotten so much bad press. But they, you know, almost immediately they loved him. He would take no caution. Bombs and bullets flying all over him and around him. And he was leading his men. And then, probably within a year, because it was self-evident now that he was a great commander and they needed him. They needed that type of ability at the front. So they said, okay, what are we going to do? Let's give him a brigade. And a brigade is, if I'm correct, 70,000, and they made him lieutenant colonel. So he did all right while he was there, but it also became immensely clear that where they really needed Churchill was in the political arena. So they made it possible for him to wind down his military career, step back into the cabinets. They gave him like a few humble positions. I forget what the first one was, but then they gave him the Minister of Munitions, which was a cabinet post, and as you might expect, pretty darn important. And when he went there, this goes directly to his genius. And I'm getting this all from a book. I think it's by William Manchester, The Last Lion, something like that. Churchill was always referred to as the Lion. I think the coat of arms of that British family of lords and dukes and all that stuff, they had a lion on it. And he, like I said, this what he did with that Ministry of Munitions speaks directly to his genius. When he went there, this is during war. War was going on now for a couple of years. And the Brits and the French were getting their pants kicked off. They were beat to the ground. So he goes there, and there's like 50 departments of munition. 50. He cuts it down to 12. 12. And I forget what with the number of people, if they also, maybe not, but he made it much more efficient. Much more efficient. And he was always, during this time of being a minister, he was always going over to the front. Over to the front. And, you know, everybody else was telling him, no, you can't, it's too dangerous, Winston, it's too dangerous. You can't go there. Look, we're not going. We stay here at 10 Downing and Whitehall. We don't go over there. We sit here nice, fat, dumb, and happy. You know? We're not going to get our heads blown off. But Winston, almost every day, during the day, took a flight across the channel to see what was going on. He wanted to know. He wasn't going to hear it from somebody else who would undoubtedly be trying to give him their take, their slant, to ensure that they looked good. Be that as it may, he did all of that. And I'm going to wrap this up pretty soon, but there was so much talk about the Americans, are they coming, not coming? This is like now, it's 1918. And the Germans are ready to, what do they say, put the fork in? They're just a stone's throw from Paris. Now, I know in World War II they had Paris from the get-go, but this is World War I. They're right outside Paris. They keep pounding, coming close. They're only like, I think, 8 miles away outside of Paris. And the Americans still hadn't come. And right at that moment, the Americans finally showed up. Now, it wasn't the Americans' fault. They were asked, but they decided too late to come. It was, and then you got to do a lot to get up. I think it was 2 or 3 million Americans thrown at this German monster. So to get that all up, and they came, and as soon as they came, that was it. The Germans it was over. It's just over. It's that quick. And we don't make enough of that. That should be heralded throughout this land, United States of America, every day. Blessings and thanksgivings should be given to the United States of America, because the United States of America in 1918 was a force to be reckoned with. And when they said they were going to do something, they did it. and Germany never had a chance. Once that happened, once the doughboys, we used to call them, came running in, tanks and everything else, it was over for Germany. I mean, I would say within a few months, they were sitting at the old railroad car where they signed the armistice. Just a great story, and like I said, I don't hear a lot of mentioning and bringing that up. You know, the powers always want to try to get away from these stories that involve the killing of many, many people, because the powers know they all have blood on their hands, so they don't want to talk about it. And they need to. They need to point out how brave Woodrow Wilson was to go against all the political pressure to not enter the war, and how well he strategized with his military guys to get it done and get it done right. You know, Germany couldn't brag that they were getting anything done right. Certainly England couldn't, and France, they never even showed up. So, I mean, the whole world needs to thank the United States for what went on in World War I. And not to jump ahead of myself, the whole world needs to thank the United States for what they did in World War II. But we'll get around to that. So, eventually, there's a lot of results with World War I and what Churchill did and what Churchill didn't do. But I'll tell you this, Churchill wanted to stop the Russians, the revolutionaries, the Bolsheviks. He wanted to stop them dead in their tracks. You know, all we ever hear about is, as far as anything like that, is, oh, we wanted to stop the Russians on the Pacific side, and we didn't want them to get big on there. This is like a sphere of influence thing. You know, they lost once to Japan in 1905, and we want to keep Russia, we want to hold them back. We don't want them coming up anymore, you know? In the meantime, and this was top people in the social hierarchy of the United States defending the Bolsheviks and why we shouldn't go in and kick them to the curb. Lenin and Trotsky and Stalin. Okay, these were people high up in the U.S. social hierarchy who gave us communism for the rest of our lives, for the rest of the world. All right? But nothing was said. And a real war went on between the Reds and the Whites. Numbers like 500,000 soldiers on the Whites, and similar numbers, though split up, I believe, in two, for the Reds. And there's no doubt about it, if a concerted effort had been made by the Allies to put down the communist threat that rose up during the end of World War I, we would not have any communism in the world today, and we would probably have much more enlightened brands of socialism. As it is, we don't have any of that stuff. What we have is a world that gets more and more depraved every day. Now, I'm not the only one saying this, so I don't feel like I'm going out on a limb here. I mean, you just look around and you see it. Anyway, there was and Churchill was the leader in trying to get the Bolsheviks put to the curb. He was a big leader. He explained it, you know, with all the rational explanations that you can get, that Bolshevism, and this type of revolution is nothing but dogs fighting like dogs. That's all they are, you know. There's nothing noble in it. There's nothing ever noble in it. It was just blood, kill, you know. And I wanted to, over time, try to cut Trotsky some slack, but there's no reason to. His hands are full with blood. You don't have to say anything about Lenin. Lenin, there's nothing that I see that exonerates him in any way. You know, he was a person who saw how he could enhance his life, make his mark in the world by using other people. He told Trotsky was worried about his Red Army deserting. And Lenin says, don't worry about it. Just put a bunch of machine gunners in the rear. You know, and I think the number was either 100 or 1,000. Put 1,000 of them in the rear. And those guys won't turn around and flee because they'll be killed by the machine gunners. And those were his own people. Lenin. Garbage. Ugh. But there's a lot of that kind of garbage in the world. There always has been. There probably always will be. But if you want to talk about evil, he's right there with Hitler. Hitler and Lenin hopefully are sitting on the same rock in hell. That's all I can hope for. Listen, I didn't want to go off crazy again, because that's kind of why I stopped giving these little talks on history. History itself is interesting, and there is a need to know. You know, I mean, I think the current opinion about people like Churchill and many others has been badly denigrated in recent times. You know, the pulling down of statues is part of that. I mean, the latest one I heard was the pulling down of the statue of Captain James Cook. I mean, the guy's got no political dog in his fight. He went out and he charted the entire world, pretty much, you know? So he gets involved with some aggressive natives, and they're going to be aggressive, no doubt. But he was not a man of hatred or a man of a detestable human being like the Lenins and the Stalins of the world and the Hitlers. He was not that at all. He was a good man. He came from good working class stock. He conducted church services for his men on his ships. And he would defend the rights of the natives. And they're pulling down this statue. This is a crazy world. It's a crazy, crazy world. And people are hearing it all over now. I don't put much stock in it, but they are predicting that this is going to go seriously bad for all of us someday. You know, you see the way they arrange these governments, and they could hardly be called governments. They're really just aggressive people trying to ensure they have their pies. Have I said enough? I think I have. I'm going to shut up now. All right. Thanks for listening. Bye.